Leviticus chapter 20 to get started. And we're going to just read two verses to get our start for tonight. Leviticus chapter 20 and verses 6 and 7. Of course, we are right in the middle of some of the laws given to the Jewish people in the book of Leviticus through Moses. And in Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 6 it says, "The soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. And ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctify you." We're going to look at a topic tonight that I actually forgot to put in the bulletin or anything, so it's a surprise for you. But it's the question tonight we're going to ask: should Christians celebrate Halloween? Should Christians celebrate Halloween? Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll look to answer this evening. Lord, we thank you for our young people tonight. We're thankful for each one that's here. We're thankful that we can find answers to those everyday questions and practical things in our life that come from your word. And we're thankful that it is still just as true today as it was when it was first written. And now, Lord, we pray that you'd help us to have understanding and balance and just a godly perspective in what we look at as we treat this topic tonight. And we pray that you would be at work in our hearts through it. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Should Christians celebrate Halloween? Well, for some of you might be, this is a short message, no problem at all. And for others, you might say, well, I don't know. I'm going to give you a story from my own personal life to start with, and that's this. When I first went to college, I was actually undecided when I first went to college. And so they signed me up as a music major. And so I started as a music major, but at the same time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went, as a lot of times freshmen will, and went around to all the different things that you could be involved in. And one of the things that I found out was our campus had a radio station, an FM radio station. And it was actually a fairly large, we were one of the top 2 or 3 Christian college stations in the country. We covered probably a third of the state of New York with our signal, and we were run right out of the campus. And so one of the things that you could do is sign up, and you could have an hour each week on the air to run the programming and be an announcer and that kind of thing. And so it was a big deal. I thought, well, that's amazing. I got to try that, because I never in my mind had crossed that I might be able to be on the radio. That seemed like such an amazing thing. And of course, long story short, eventually I got hooked, and that became my major, communications, and I was in radio for a number of years afterwards. But of course, till you get started with college and you get going, you get signed up and you get your shifts going, it's probably, middle September, late September till I first had my first time on the air. And so this was probably, I never forget my very first year on the air. I think it was the Thursday nights that I used to be on, and it was probably the third or fourth time, once a week, and it fell on October 31st. And I immediately got on the microphone at my time, and I said to everyone, "Happy Halloween, everyone!" And no sooner had I closed the mic and started the music that the phone lit up next to me. And it was our general manager of the station who was immediately calling me, and he says, "Did you just say Happy Halloween on a Christian radio station?" And I said, yeah. He said, "We don't say that here. That's not Christian. We can't do that." And I was like, okay, I didn't know. It didn't occur to me that we didn't say that. I mean, I grew up in a Christian home, and I think we've all had different perspectives. I learned my lesson that day the hard way. But to me, Halloween was always just kind of like, it wasn't a Christian holiday, but it was something that you kind of just have a little fun with, get some candy, enjoy the time, bob for some apples or whatever you do. It never meant anything to me, and so it never occurred to me that that there was a whole lot of people out there who were very anti-Halloween until I found out that day. And, my perspective has gradually changed through the years. Don't get me wrong. But I want us to really think about Halloween, because we can look at this from two different perspectives. You can look at this Halloween stuff from there's devils and ghosts and all this, or you can look at it as it's some kids having some fun. And why we want to take their fun away from them, And so I think we need to look at a biblical perspective, and I want to give you some thoughts tonight so that you can make up your own mind. As I do with many of these things, I think that there is certainly room for personal discernment and personal liberty in making decisions about how and to what extent you might have a celebration like this. And the fact is, we all know in general terms that Halloween is a holiday that celebrates devils and ghosts and scaring people and other things that the Bible would probably be against. And but yet there's some people that simply see it as harmless fun. It's a time when kids can just dress up and get some candy. And so we're going to just ask the question, what is it that God really cares about when it comes to this season? Of course, it's appropriate because it's happening here this week. So I want us to first maybe think about some history. A lot of us don't know the history of Halloween and where it all started, and why we do this kind of strange holiday once a year. And so a little bit of background is helpful, I think, because the tradition actually is very, very old. It originated with the ancient Celtic festival called Samhain, and this festival was held on October 31st, because November 1st was their first day of their new year for the Celtic people. This was 2,000 years ago when they would have done these celebrations. And at the celebrations, they would light these bonfires, and they would wear costumes to ward off ghosts. And so most of the Ireland, United Kingdom, Northern France, this was what they would have done back in the times when the Celts ruled. The day marked the end of summer and the harvest. It began the beginning of the dark and cold winter. And Celts believed that on the night of the night before the New Year, or Halloween, what became Halloween, that this boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. And so they celebrated Samhain when it was believed that the ghost of the dead returned to earth. And they built these bonfires, and they wore costumes. And when the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier that evening, from this big bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. So you can see it's really got nothing to do with Christianity from the get-go. Well, the Christians came along over the years and did all they could to try to Christianize the holiday. And so what happens is around 600 A.D., so this would have been at least 600 years or so after the Celts had been on the scene, one of the popes, Pope Boniface IV, he dedicated a day to honor the Christian martyrs, and there became a feast called the All Martyrs Day, which was established, and Pope Gregory III on the 8th century expanded it to include saints and martyrs, both, and he moved this observance to November 1st in order to almost, explicitly to try to extinguish the Halloween celebration, so that the Christians had their own holiday on November 1st. And the fact is, it didn't always work the way he had hoped. The church had this new day. Sometimes it's called All Souls Day, and it became something that really was celebrated in very similar ways. So the Christian holiday was celebrated with big bonfires and parades and dressing up in costumes, and they dressed up as saints and angels and devils, and they were doing this because it was a way they commemorated those that had died, right? The martyrs that had died. But it was really just a repackaging of the same thing the Celts were doing. And so what had become by Middle English known as All Hallow Mass, which is what would be called All Saints Day in Middle English, the night before of it became All Hallows Eve, and eventually the English that we have today, Halloween. which is what it evolved into. So let's fast forward a little bit into how it infiltrated our culture and society here. The celebration of Halloween in colonial days was very limited. You can imagine the Puritans came over. I think we did a message some time ago even about Christmas. The Puritans didn't celebrate Christmas either. They thought that was a wrong thing to do. And of course they didn't celebrate Halloween either. They were against it. However, there was a lot of celebration in more of the southern colonies where the Puritans didn't have as much influence. So there were Halloween festivities in the colonial days here in America. And by the middle of the 19th century, there were annual autumn festivals, but Halloween was still not celebrated everywhere. It really wasn't until the second half of the 19th century, or the late 1800s, that America began to be flooded with new immigrants. And many of these immigrants were of the Irish heritage. And the Irish were fleeing their land because of the potato famine and other reasons, and they brought with them this popular celebration of Halloween, and it kind of spread through the colonies, and eventually grew to what it has become today. And by the way, today Americans spend an estimated $6 billion on Halloween. 6 with a B, $billion. It's the country's second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. You might not believe that, but this is the second largest moneymaker for holidays. And here you all thought it was Mother's Day, but no, it's not Mother's Day. Hallmark wishes it was, but I don't know how many Halloween cards you get sent around. But anyway, so this is what it has become today. We have some traditions and some practices that we have at Halloween time. One of those is trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating probably dates back to when they used to have these All Saints' Day parades in England, and during those festivities, the poor citizens would beg for food, and the families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for their family's dead relatives. So this was a Catholic practice, of course, and so it was, get a poor person, we'll give you something to eat, and we'll let you pray for my family in exchange. Gets me another person to pray for my dead relatives. And it was called trick-or-treating. And so this was likely a way that they replaced this ancient practice of leaving food for the roaming spirits that the Celts were doing. And the practice was called by the church going a-souling, which was eventually taken up by children, because the poor children would then go and visit people's houses and say, if you give me something, give me a treat, I will pray for your dead relatives. And that was the way it kind of evolved into trick-or-treating of today. Also, another thing that we tend to think about is Halloween is when it was believed that ghosts came back to the earthly world, and people thought that they would encounter ghosts if they left their homes. And so one of the reasons they dressed up in costumes was to avoid being recognized by these ghosts. They would just think, well, I'm one of them. You know, I put a sheet over my head, cut out a few eyes. They won't know the difference between me and somebody else. And that, as strange as this may sound, I mean, this is true. This is where these things started. They wanted to be unrecognizable, and that's why they went out in costume. So, all this to say, this is just a brief history tour of Halloween. We can clearly see that really it has no basis as a Christian holiday. And really, even the attempts that we've made to call November 1st All Saints' Day was really just a poor attempt to supplant what Halloween had been all along and to Christianize what really was just a pagan holiday, which really had no business with Christians at all. So just want to ask us a couple of questions tonight to think about when we consider for us today, here in the 21st century, and in our culture and in our society, what it means to us and whether we feel like our consciences should allow this to be participated in. So the first question is this. Oftentimes I just hear this, and in fact this is the way I used to feel too, that, hey, isn't this something that it's just good, clean fun? Can't we just do this in fun and just have a little fun, not worry about what the history was, because that's not really what it means to me. And the fact is, it may be. For some people, some places, somewhere, if you have a very naive view of Halloween and you didn't just listen to the history that I just gave you, if you just have a simplistic mind of what it's about, it's very, very easy for you just to think that there's no real significance to it. And maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't something that really eats on your conscience. But I also think that we need to consider the fact that we should not ever underestimate or caricaturize, maybe is the word, the forces of darkness that are around us. And really, isn't that what Halloween does when they put on devil faces and whatever and these things, ghosts? What are we doing? We are turning what is a true spiritual force of darkness into a cartoon character. And we're making it feel like this is not really a significant threat. And the fact is, it is. Ephesians 6:12 tells us this: we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that all or most or even some of the people out there that profess to be, Satan worshipers or whatever they are, witches or whatever they are, that they really are in touch with these spiritual forces of wickedness. I say most of them are probably two-bit hucksters, and they've got nothing but just illusions of their own mind in here. But the fact of the matter is, the Bible does warn us that there are spiritual forces at work. They're forces of darkness. And that a lot of the times the problems and the struggles that we face in life that you can't put your finger on, you don't understand why you might feel depressed, or you might feel down, or you might feel defeated, or you might feel in certain circumstances, just oppressed in some way. Sometimes that may be because of the forces that are out there. It says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That flat tire you got today and really ruined your day, yeah, that was a true flat tire, but maybe there was another force at work behind it. Now, I'm not saying we should look for devils under every corner, because that's not our way either. The fact is, greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. And we have to recognize that the power of Christ in us is greater than any of these spiritual forces that are at work in the world around us. But nonetheless, the Bible does warn us and say we have to recognize they are at play. And Satan is still the prince of the power of the air. And he still does have a certain amount of authority and control over our circumstances and the world around us. And while the Christian cannot be demon-possessed in any way, we can certainly be impacted by the work of Satan. And we do know also that the Wiccan, the Satanists, and the other occultic groups, they come out in force in Halloween. They come out from the woodwork. People that this is my high holy day, for them. And they believe in this. They believe in those powers of darkness. They worship them, some of them. And we may not always see these kind of people in our circles, but maybe you have from time to time seen these types of people. And we just need to be especially watchful this time of the year, because these are the times when, all of the frenzy is worked up related to occultic practices. And so I guess if you were, naive and just looking at this from a simplistic view, you might be able to say it can all be done in good fun. But let's make sure that we don't de-emphasize the true power of spiritual darkness that's in our world in the process, because that would be a misstep on our part. The second question I want us to consider tonight is, what does it teach our children? What does celebrating Halloween with your children teach them? We know, for instance, that there are dangers in the world today, especially for our children. Back in my day, I don't know if I've heard any cases recently, but it seemed like every year, back in, I don't know, maybe they were just sadistic in the 80s, I don't know, but they used to put like razor blades in apples. You ever hear this stuff? And other kind of like heinous things that they would do. And some kid somewhere in the country would find like some kind of, either razor blade or poison or something, I don't know, in their trick-or-treat bags. And the fact of the matter is, our world hasn't gotten any better. I haven't heard any reports of this recently, but the fact is, predators and human traffickers are out in force. And I can tell you one thing, setting your kids loose through town on their own in a dark night in a costume that nobody can recognize them in is a prime target. It's a heyday for somebody that wants to go abduct a child. You've got to be very careful of this. It's an ideal time for them to lure and abduct children from the streets. There is a real danger. And we have to, think about it. Would you do this any other night of the week? Think about how many families in our world, hey, go out after dark and knock on strangers' doors all through town tonight. We would say, no, you don't do that. But this one night of the year, it's okay. What are we teaching our kids? I don't know. I think there is a danger there. Now, I know some parents aren't that way. They'll go along and make sure, and that's good. But some of them are just running loose, right? Some of them are just running loose, and we have to be aware of that. And there's also a dangerous precedent, I think, that it teaches your kids, especially when you say you're going to dress up in a costume. What do you want to dress up as this year? Well, you're going to be a ghost or a witch or some other kind of ghoul or something like that. What are you teaching your kid at that point? Why would you want them to idolize those things with their costumes? Isn't that really what you're teaching them, that these are things that, hey, you can go be? And I know some of them are superheroes or Paw Patrols or whatever they are now, but the fact is there's just as many of the ghosts and devils and stuff as there were in years past. And I think we always have to remember in Proverbs 22:6, the simple verse that we all know, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. The point here is we set precedents in our children's lives. It may not always be an issue of right or wrong, but it may be an issue of I'm going to look further down the road than the immediate, so that I set them up to train them to be able to be good parents of their own someday, and be able to equip them to continue to follow the Lord. And so we have to ask ourselves those questions. The next question that I think we need to ask is, what is it that, innately involved with Halloween, which happens with adults, kids, teenagers, they're big into this too, is that there is this attraction, there's this magnetism to the occult world. Now, they may not use the word occult, but they're interested in this, right? This is fascinating. And there's a natural curiosity, maybe is the way of saying this. What really is there? Maybe if I went up to the graveyard, there would be a ghost that I would see, And of course, the TV's not helping you any. We have celebrities hosting shows now on, finding aliens and finding ghosts and all these other things. You have paranormal. I see this. I don't even know who it is, but there's a van I see at Walmart in Huntington. He's got paranormal investigator on his back of his van. I don't know if he's a real guy or he's just like a, I don't know what. But the fact is, there's people who believe in this stuff and chase it down because they're interested, they're curious. Well, what if, I saw a fuzzy image somewhere, I heard a strange noise, and I'm worried or I'm concerned, I want to know what it is. Well, let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 18, because the Bible does tell us something about how our natural curiosity to these things should be dealt with. And in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 to 13, we'll look at this. It really comes down to the fact that, do you realize that the two verses we've looked at so far are from Leviticus and Deuteronomy? These issues that we're dealing with today in terms of the occult and our curiosity from it is common to mankind. It goes way, way back. These were things that God knew even the nation of Israel was going to struggle with. And so that's why he puts them here in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. So verses 9 to 13 of Deuteronomy 18, he says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire. That was a spiritual practice of another false religion. Or that useth divination, or an observer of times. That would be like an astrologer. Or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits. That would be people that have seances. Or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God. And I think the key to understanding those verses is obviously God doesn't want us to be involved in anything related remotely with the occult. But he also tells us why. And the answer to why is found in verse 13. He says, I don't want you to do all these things. Why? Because I want you to be perfect with the Lord your God. This word perfect means complete, means satisfied, means I'm filled up. In other words, God fills my life, fills my needs, fills everything about my being so deeply and so in such a contented way that I don't need to go chasing after what it is or might be, or where the ghost might be, or trying to get my fortune read and all this stuff. The fact is, we have this curiosity again for the occult because in some way we feel like maybe I'm missing out on something, right? Maybe there's information that I need to know that someone could tell me, or maybe I could talk to a ghost, or maybe I could this or that. You know, we have these fantastical ideas that are fed by our media and fed by our culture, right? And we have this curiosity, and it wells up because we think, well, maybe I'm missing something. Isn't this the same lie that Satan told Eve? It's, you're not good enough with just God. You need this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You're missing out on something, Eve. And if you just took some of this fruit, you would be like God. Then you really would have all the information. This was the great lie told that brought down the human race. And it's the same lie we keep getting told, we tell ourselves, is that maybe just being with God isn't enough. Maybe I need to go chase after something else. Maybe it's God plus this will help me. And maybe I'll get some of my answers that I need. Certainly, Saul was that way. Remember when Saul went and consulted, he tried to conjure up Samuel with that witch of Endor and became, involved in that and died the next day because of it. God judged him. This was something that we have this natural curiosity. And when we allow ourselves to open up to the occult, what is God saying? He's saying, what you're saying to me is that I'm not enough. I'm not enough for you. And we shouldn't ever put ourselves in a position where we feel like God is not enough because he's meant to be enough. And so what do we do? What does Halloween do? It celebrates the occult. It heightens our curiosity. It promotes it to other people. And I'm just going to bring these references up. There's plenty of movies out there that do this as well, that feed our desire for these types of things. And I'll tell you one that I'm often not one to sit here and judge movies, but I'll tell you, there's a movie out there from Disney. It's from a few years ago called Coco. Ever hear of Coco? It's an animated movie, and it's all about celebrating the occultic practices of ancestor worship. The whole thing. It's all about Mexico's Day of the Dead and how they celebrate that, and how this guy goes through the underworld to contact his dead relatives and all these other things. And it celebrates the occult is what it does. Obviously you can't expect them to write, they're not Christian people, and they're not going to write Christian movies. And I'm not saying boycott Disney. I'm just saying be discerning even in your animated films as far as what it is that you're watching and how you are heightening your curiosity for those things where God is supposed to fill that need for you. And so, knowing these origins, knowing some of the answers to some of these questions, let's kind of bring it back around. If we know that the origins of Halloween are pagan, how can we justify being a part of that? Well, I'm going to answer the question probably with a question, and that is this. There's probably many things in our lives, in our society, that we do every day that have pagan origins. We can't escape that. How many times have you heard, throw salt over your shoulder, right? Or don't walk under a ladder. Well, that should just be OSHA, right? They're telling you that. No, it's break a mirror, you get 7 years of bad luck, right? And whatever it is, don't watch out for the black cats or whatever it is. There's all kinds of things that come from pagan practices that are habitual. How many times do you sneeze and someone says, God bless you, right? Why do we need to do that? You know, that's a pagan ritual. That's what it is. Honestly, a lot of times I don't tell people that. And then I'm looked at as rude, right? Because it's like somebody sneezed, and here the preacher didn't say, God bless you. You know, that's a bad thing to be in, position to be in. And sometimes I'll say it anyway. But the point is, that's a pagan practice. It's what it started, you know. And the fact is, we do it all the time. It's a courtesy. You're not considered even, you know, a human being if you're not, you know, consider it that way. But it's pagan origin. So if you want to go down that trail and say everything of pagan origin we got to cut out of our life, you're going to find you're living in a pretty sterile box. So if you just believe that, you know, that this is a harmless secular activity, if it's got no meaning, if you just want to have some simple fun, and you don't really have a conscience about this, because really it comes down to conscience. And we have to recognize that. And each of us has our own conscience as we are receptive to the Holy Spirit's leading in our life. There may be possible ways and reasons that you could be a part of that without violating your conscience. So I don't want to just say, hey, we have to shut it all down from that side. But I do think there are some 3 thoughts tonight that I just want to leave you with in terms of how I think we really, options that we have to react to Halloween. And first of all is this. You can simply say, it's not for me. I'm not going to participate. I don't want anything to do with it. And you turn off your porch light, and you don't put up the decorations. You keep yourself from it, and it becomes you know, I'm going to go out of town that day, make sure nobody knocks on my door that night, and you can sit in a corner somewhere and pray for those people who are influenced and drawn to evil at this time of year. And I say it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the fact is, for some people, that's where their conscience might lead them. You know, there's certainly some truth to the fact that there's a lot of bad things going on in Halloween. And certainly there's a lot of people, especially this time of year, that need our prayer and need our extension of God to work in their hearts and to bring them up to the gospel. But so you could do that. The second thought I would say is this. You could participate in a limited way. Here's what I mean by that. Just some thoughts. If you do decide to participate, it's something that you should make sure you have a habit that I'm not going to promote the ghosts. I'm not going to promote the devils. I'm not going to promote the evil spirits and the superstitions and the other practices. I'm not going to promote those things in my household, the things that run counter to the Christian faith. We have to identify those things and make sure those don't become a part of our celebration. We certainly don't want to glorify them, and we certainly don't want to caricaturize things that are truly evil. And I will say this much. I always grew up in the country, so it was never really an issue for me. I didn't ever get to go trick-or-treating. It was, you know, if I went to go, we went to a couple relatives' houses and went home, but it was driving a car, you know, it took an hour and you got 3 houses in and you went home, you know, that's basically what it was. And, you know, everybody knew everybody. But there's plenty of people that live in a town, right in a street, and you've got hundreds of kids walking by your door that night, right, on trick-or-treat night. And I think one of the greatest things that you can do is use that as an opportunity to give out the gospel. Because how many times are you going to have the opportunity for people coming to your doorstep and willing to take whatever you give them? I mean, this is the night. This is your one great opportunity. So I say, if you're going to do this, do it big. Be the house on the street that gives out the full-size Snickers bars, right? It gives the king-size Reese's cups or whatever it is, you know. Get the reputation as this is the place you want to be. Right? And make sure every piece of candy you give out also comes with a gospel tract. I can guarantee you, you're going to get the gospel message out to some kids that night. They may not read every tract, whatever thing, but the fact is, if they know we're going to make a beeline to that guy's house because he's got the best stuff, make sure you get the tract in with them, and you can be a witness right through Halloween. For some of you that live in the country, you can stock up, and then you can eat all the candy the next day because nobody will be at your door. And, it works out for you okay, too. So, but that's something that we need to do. And I think there's biblical precedent for this. And I want us to look, as we close to this thought, from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, because Paul was a big proponent of this. Paul, I don't know if you realize just how cutting edge and probably controversial he was in his means of reaching people with the gospel. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 20, when he talks about how he shares the gospel, he says in verse 20, "Unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." And if you want to put a verse on your wall, there's a good one to put. That I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. We can't compromise our beliefs. We can't, trivialize what is truly spiritual wickedness. But the fact is, we need to see how much we can get people on the level that they're at in order to get the gospel out. You can't expect people to come walk in the doors of the church who never grew up in a church. You got to get them where they're at. And if that means you're going to turn your light on and you're going to get gospel out to people, or you're going to have some kind of a means to use this for God's glory, I think that's what you would have found Paul doing on a Halloween night. He would have been out distributing the gospel and sharing Christ with people that needed it. And I will also say, just as a not that we can do what the Catholics did in the 600s, but do things like support our harvest night. This is just one example. But not that we have to have something to, instead of what the kids get to do, but we want our kids to have a good time. We want to have a wholesome time. We want them to be able to still have some fun games and activities and get some candy and get to dress up and have their fun in that. Every kid likes to do those things. And you know what? That's one of the reasons why we have our harvest night each year this time of year, because it gives kids a wholesome outlet. Hopefully, maybe even some of their parents come out. We're going to bring the gospel to them in a very simple way, and they're going to get to experience all of the fun of the season without having to be exposed to the spiritual wickedness that's out there and the dangers that might be out there. And so I think that there is ways in which we can provide a wholesome and Christian alternative to what they might otherwise want to get themselves involved in. So just some thoughts tonight about how we should consider Halloween. And again, I think you really need to leave it up to your conscience. But I would say, don't underestimate the powers of the occult, and don't celebrate them either. Let's be on the watch. Let's not allow our senses to be, dulled because it's just all around us all the time. Let's recognize things for what they are and be discerning Christians as we make decisions about how to celebrate this holiday and any of the practices that we do. We're meant to be on the watch, and we're meant to be discerning in all that we do.